Maxed Out Man, helping you become the man you were made to be.
Hey guys, it's Kevin Davis from the Maxed Out Man podcast. This is episode number 49. I am here today with Dr. Brett Dellar. He's a keynote speaker, life mentor, and coach, health and wellness advocate, founder of the Momentum Revolution, and he's also been a chiropractor for 20 plus years. His bio says he helps people overcome their emotional challenges to live a life full of happiness and connection. Hey, I was looking at some of your stuff today. I really appreciate you joining me. I think you and I are on the same highway in similar lanes is kind of the way I would explain it. So, hey, welcome. Thanks so much for taking the time to be here.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having us. It's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Hey, if you will, just kind of walk through, that's your kind of LinkedIn bio, right? Kind of the highlights of that. But we always want to I always like setting the stage because we have a little bit of time here just to get your backstory and kind of how you got to where you are, kind of the passions for what you do and kind of your full story, really, just to lay that foundation for us.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Kev. I had a very blessed childhood in a lot of ways. My parents are still together, loving, caring, supportive, nurturing, all that sort of stuff. And I was very lucky that I had that foundation growing up. Very, very blessed. And I left school, ended up becoming a police officer for about 8 or 9 years, including a couple of years as a detective, which I really enjoyed, most parts of it. But it wore me down because all I saw was a negative side of life for a long time. And I was a little bit lost in myself at that period of time. And about the age of 29, 30, I pulled the pin on that and didn't know what I was going to do. Ended up doing a few other bits and pieces for a couple of years before at the age of 35, I went to uni and started studying as a chiropractor. And have been doing that, studying and working as a chiropractor, like you said, for the last 20 years. But it wasn't, and then the last 6 years or so, I've been working in the personal development space, the life coaching, etc. But it wasn't always just a smooth sailing. Like everyone's got their own journey, everyone's got their own story. And for me, I had some childhood trauma at the age of 6 and 7 when I was sexually abused by a neighbour. And I kept that to myself for many, many years until I was in my, I think I first told someone I was about 22, 23, and then didn't really go and see a counsellor until I was about 27, 28, which coincides just before I left the police force. And that, not dealing with that particular issue, the emotions that were tied to it, for such a long time, the shame, the blame, the guilt, the self-blame, the embarrassment, etc. It really controlled me emotionally without me knowing it. And I went through these periods of depression for basically 30 years. From my late teens onwards until I was 50, I just went through these cycles of depression. And I really struggled, even though everyone thought I was this, successful, happy, great marriage guy. But behind it all, behind the scenes, behind the masks, was this bloke who was really struggling, didn't like who I was as a person, and just really, really struggled. And I got to the point where I decided I had to try and do something about it. I listened to a book, and books have been a little bit of a theme for me throughout my life. They've sort of changed the direction of my life, and we'll probably get into that a little bit later on. But I decided that I had to do something, and I just started listening to self-help books, and bit by bit my mindset changed. Ended up doing a life coaching course, and in my first month of doing that, I had a very good mate of mine who's a good mate now. He was just a colleague in the classroom at the time. He just asked me a series of questions, and he basically called me out on my shit and said, "Mate, you've got this secret you don't want to talk about. You've got this issue you don't discuss. You've obviously suffering from some mental health challenges." And I'm just going, yep. And he just said, "Mate, are you sick of living like that?" And it hit me like a truck. And I went, you know what, I am. And it was at that point I knew my life was going to change. I didn't know how. And every time I talk about it, even now, I've just got goosebumps because it changed my life instantly. And I ended up doing a men's workshop. I travelled across the other side of Australia, 5-hour flight, 2-hour drive up the coast, and did a workshop with 50 other men. And that 3.5 days changed my life. And I just became obsessed by personal development work. I was doing workshop after workshop, online program after online program, and found who I was. I found who I was as a person. I started believing myself again, loved myself for the first time in my life, and get to the point now where it's like I just want to help other people in that same space, because it's a horrible space to be in. And when you live in it for such a long time, when you realize you don't have to be there, it's, it changes not only your life, but all those around you. And it's such a beautiful and a powerful thing. Just very, very blessed to be here in this space right now.
Wow, there's a lot. I can relate to a lot of that, and I'm curious about a few things. I want to kind of follow up on some of that, but I kind of grew up in a very volatile childhood, kind of no sexual abuse, anything like that, but divorce and alcoholism and drug addiction and all of that stuff. I moved 8 or 9 times in the first 7 years of school, and all of these things. But at some point in my life, I felt like I was pretty blessed because I came to terms with that trauma early on, and not pushed it down deep. I always joke and say, yeah, we push our emotions down deep, and so we don't have to deal with them, but really kind of made peace with it to the point where I didn't feel like it really kind of affected me. And obviously all of that affects us in different ways, long-term and all that. But I'm curious how that kind of trauma manifested itself over those 30 years. Like, what does that practically look like? I know it's kind of this underpinning of emotions and how you deal with anger, I'm sure, and stress and those kind of things. But I'm curious how that manifested during those 30 years.
Yeah, I'm very blessed, and being an ex-police officer and now working in this space, I can see that a lot of men and women have had a childhood like you've described. And I look back at my childhood and go, geez, I was very blessed. And I've got these parents who just said, you can do whatever you want. But because of the underlying pinning of what happened to me, it wore away at that self-belief and that self-esteem and that self-love. Now, as a child, when that sort of trauma happens, this is my perception of it and how I feel it manifests itself in this particular way. Your brain, your heart, your soul doesn't have the power to deal with that trauma at such a young age. And so I believe it puts it in a box. Okay. And then when I was in my late teens, early 20s, late teens more so, all of a sudden, I always knew what had happened to me. It wasn't like it was a repressed memory or anything. I always knew it was there, but there was no emotion attached to it. Then as I got to my late teens, all of a sudden, all these emotions started to bubble up. And I was going, what's going on with this? I don't understand it. And of course, as a bloke, be tough. Don't let that stuff, affect you. And I just ignored it, basically. And then as a police officer, I joined at the age of 21. You had to be even tougher and stronger, and don't let stuff, and it's very much a boys' club, even though some of my best partners were females because they could talk their way out of stuff. They were, they knew how to use words, which was what I learned really from them, and learned how to talk to people. And for me, basically what would happen is, as it manifested, as the depression would come up, I'd pretend that there was nothing wrong. And I would bury it down. I would push it down. And I started playing sport exactly the same time that my abuse happened at the age of 6. And sport was my go-to. Running, hockey, Australian rules football, field hockey that is, Australian rules football, cricket, and then later on rowing, and I'm still playing cricket now. Apart from the weekend, I'm still sore actually as a result. But all those things allowed me to cope in a positive way in regards to not going down the whole I definitely used alcohol in my late teens, early 20s, and I used it. I wasn't addicted to it, and I would binge. I'd binge hard Thursday to Sunday, and then but I would always make sure that I was all right. I wouldn't drink on the Friday before sport, so I was right for my sport because that was my safe space, my control space, I suppose, and that's how I controlled my life. Later on, it was with study and with work. I always kept myself busy, so I always had something on the go, so I didn't have to think about the stuff. But it'd go through these cycles. I would go through these cycles where I would be feeling okay for 3 months or 6 months or 12 months or sometimes a bit longer, especially as I was younger, when I was in my 20s. But the older I got and the more stuff that had happened to me over time, because we all have, multiple challenges, the cycles got closer together and the intensity got worse. And so my depressions, and no one saw it apart from my wife and a couple of very close people. I didn't let my family see it because, it's the embarrassment, I suppose, that stigma around mental well-being. And that's one of the things I'm really passionate about now, is breaking that stigma, because it's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's just it's there. It's just there. So I would go through months of pretending I was okay and really struggling with depression. I remember a whole season of playing football, and I played at not an elite level, but a good level. And I couldn't get a kick in the reserves. I was so mentally messed up. My sport was horrible. My relationships struggled as a result. I had a couple of very wonderful girlfriends in my past and could have got married. But as soon as things got too close or too tough, I'd run because I was so fearful of that commitment and what, the pain might cause, because another pain or trauma would just send me over the top, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's almost like from what I understand, a lot of people will kind of fear not only telling people, but telling your family and getting close to people and making that commitment, because at some point you have to have the conversation that goes beyond, hey, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. Right. Like that. Fine only works for a little while. So is that kind of true in some of what you see with that?
100%. Yeah. You can't hide what's underneath forever and ever. It just doesn't work like that. And for me, as I got a little bit older and I had spoken about it a little bit, I would use my abuse as an excuse in relationships. I would use it as a block to keep people away, to keep partners away, keep their distance, because it was always an excuse, and it just it wasn't healthy in any way, shape, or form. It wasn't healthy for me, and wasn't healthy for the relationships either.
Yeah, because you're almost like, I can't because of this, right? Like and it's like insert whatever comes after can't and use the same because of the entire time. I think it's interesting. Go ahead.
No, go on.
Oh, I was going to say, I think it's interesting that you're talking about depression in terms of how it affects performance, because I think a lot of times we don't really define it that way. And I honestly think that that's something that men can identify with a little bit better, because a lot of times depression, and I suffer from seasonal affective disorder. And I don't even like calling it affective disorder, but it's, we live in the mountains of Montana. We get 6 months of winter. We have almost, everybody has low vitamin D here and all that. So, but it's more of like this general malaise and lack of motivation versus, actually affecting day-to-day performance. And I think your point about sport and actually not being able to perform at that level because of the underlying depression, I think that's actually something I've never really thought about. And I really think that's interesting.
And I've heard other people speak, and they could perform no matter what. But I think in general, and I'm talking about elite people in their sports, respective sports. But for a lot of people, it affects the way we work. It affects our quality of work. It affects the way, for sport. At one point, was been married for 5 years. Oh, probably 5 years at that point in time, and it was affecting my performance in the bedroom. I just could not, because I was in such a bad place. It was just no, it affects everything. And until you step back and see it from a different perspective and understand things, and this is where I come from a lot. It's like, I call it the struggle bubble. When we're in that struggle bubble, all we're trying to do is keep our head above water, and we're just trying to survive. We're trying to get through each day as best we can with the tools we have. And often we don't have many tools because we don't want the tools, because we're afraid of whatever may happen. And once we can step out or have someone help you see things from a different perspective, then all of a sudden we can start to put the pieces of that puzzle back together again. And for me, looking back now and seeing all those parts of the puzzle, it's like, oh my God, you put up with this for such a long time. Why? And when I had that breakthrough, those breakthrough moments, I don't regret anything. I don't regret anything that happened to me. Because I'm in such a good space now. It's allowed me to become the man I am and the person I am. But there was always one nagging thing for about 6 months. It's like, why didn't you do something sooner? Why didn't you work on it sooner? Why didn't you what you missed out on by not doing things, when you were 20 rather than you were 50? And I had to really come to terms with that and be at peace with it, because it was like, you weren't ready. You know, all this struggle you've had for all these years has allowed you to be more empathetic now, more understanding, more of a more rounded person as a result. So, once I got through that, it's like, you know what, there is no regret. It's just my journey, and this is just my pace of my journey. Everyone's pace and journey is different.
Yeah, and I think we get placed into the timing and situation that we can best serve in, and kind of best deal with it. I use a couple of phrases: either work with what you have, work with what we've got, right? No matter where that is, and start from where you are. Right? You can't really go back 30 years and start there, because you're not there anymore, right? Like, so you don't really have a lot of choices. So the regret, becomes something that is a little bit of a challenge to deal with, because it doesn't ultimately help you to be very productive.
Exactly the opposite. It holds you in the past almost, and like you said, you have to start from now to move forward. You've got to let go of that stuff and and everyone has their own way of doing it, whether it's through counseling or workshops or reading books, or just some people just have this capacity just to work through stuff and come out the other side. And for those people, I just take my hat off to them. It's just like, because it's hard. But at the end of the day, and this is a secret, I think, to everything we do, no matter what it is, whether it's personal development, overcoming our challenges, we have to do the work. You just have to do the work. If you don't do the work on yourself, then nothing's going to change. And that's the secret. Having support and having people guide you and hold you accountable, absolutely. But you still have to do the work.
I like that concept. And when you were talking about childhood trauma and all that, I think in Western culture, a lot of times we place blame on the things that we've had that have happened in our past in such a way that we remove the control, right? Like there are a lot of times in decision making that we make. I've actually said to my friends, they'll be like, well, it's not my fault because this happened to me. And I'm like, well, your reaction to it, or how you're dealing with it now, actually is your fault, which is a good thing, because if it's your fault, then you actually can control the outcome. Whereas if you have no control over what happened, then you have no ability to control the outcome.
And for me, that control, I hadn't seen my perpetrator for 44 years, and he was still controlling me emotionally.
Oh, wow.
He was, without me knowing it, he was still controlling the way I thought and acted and behaved about myself. And I was still living this life because of what had happened to me. And what I had to learn was, and what I learned along the way was, I thought my my trauma was who I was. I thought it was a part of me. And it wasn't till I got to deal with that trauma in that really powerful way that I took control of my life back. I took control from my perpetrator and went, you know what? You have got no control of me anymore. You are out of my life. And once I did that, I realized that that wasn't who I was. It was what happened to me. And
Right.
once I could make the distinction between those two, I could move forward much, much quicker. It was still a roller coaster ride, but it was much, much quicker. But the fear of having to face that and the emotions behind that, I mean, I'd walked into an office building, a council chamber building, which is like a shire or county, I suppose, where you guys are from. And a gunman had walked in and started shooting up the officers and shot and killed someone. I went into that room, into those offices, and I was in there for 5 hours with some colleagues, rescuing people and looking for the offender. Now, every time you opened a door, there was a chance that you're going to get shot and killed. And the fear of that was not as great as the fear of me having to face and confront my emotions from my perpetrator. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever had to do, was actually confront my emotions buried for 44 years, and it was walking through that door that day.
And can you explain why? Like, is it something you can put into words? And again, we're kind of a little bit of talking about control. Like when you're walking through that door, you've been trained.
Yep.
You know what to do. You know procedure. Even though you don't know what to expect, you do have a certain amount of control, right?
Exactly. You have your colleagues with you. You have each other's back. You have, like you said, you've been trained. You know what you're meant to do and how you're meant to do it to a certain extent. And like you said, you don't know what the unknown is that will come from that. And so you've got this structure in place. You've got this format to work through as you go through from room to room, for example. And the brain, the body, the soul, whatever it is designed to keep you safe, the fight or flight. Now, when it comes to a snake or heights, boom, I'm out of there. I can run. Okay.
Right.
Then that's what we do. Or we fight, whatever we do. When it comes to this particular situation, I wanted to run, but you were trained and you had control where you go, okay, I have to do this. I have to do this. And so you do what was necessary in that moment. And the brain is designed to keep you safe and have this fight, flight, or freeze mode. The brain, and there's a guy called Alan Fogel who's a PhD, and he did some tests on a functional MRI machine, which allowed him to see the brain in real time activate. And so he knew what the people's fears were. So he put them into this MRI machine and he stimulated them with their fears, their physical fears. And what he found was that certain parts of the brain would light up. He then put them back in again afterwards, all these people, and then stimulated them with their emotional fears. And he found the exact same parts of the brain lit up. And so by doing that, he surmised that the brain can't distinguish between emotional fear and physical fear. And so when you have the physical fear, like walking into a building where there's a gunman or a snake or heights, whatever it is, the body can react and run or hide or fight. When it's emotional fear, where can you run? Where can you hide? Where can you fight? You can't. It's in there. So what does the body do? It buries it, it hides it, it numbs it. Unless you face it and deal with it in that moment, which means you have to embrace your emotions, embrace your fear, embrace your pain, embrace your grief. Okay? And a lot of that stuff is really hard for people. So we tend to ignore it and bury it. Especially, in my opinion, for men, we have to be tough and strong and don't allow ourselves to show that weakness, what is perceived a weakness, and it's not at all. But that Western culture showing emotions a weakness, and so for me, once I sort of got the concept of, what my body was doing was trying to protect me from death, because that's what the body thought it was going to do, because it was in total fear. Then I went, okay, It's protecting me. That's its job. And it does, and it protected me when I was 6 years old till I was 20. And then I went, okay, I've protected you long enough. Now it's time to deal with it. And of course, by that stage, the conscious mind steps in and goes, no, you're not dealing with this, mate. You're going to run from here and you're going to hide and bury this. You're going to get on the terps, you're going to get drunk, and you're going to ignore the whole lot. And I did that for 30 years, and I used the alcohol in my late teens, early 20s and 30s, because we can drink over here at the age of 18. And so my patterns changed over time, but it was still in fear that entire time. And until I confronted that fear, that's when everything changed. I took my power back. I took control back. I took my life back, really.
Yeah, it took 30 years, but I'm glad that it didn't take 60 years, right? Like, I guess that's
100%.
right. Like at some point you were able to make that change. And I think what you said is so true about men with us. There's this balance between being strong, being the provider, and the protector for those that are in our lives, and not really understanding how to be that for ourselves in a lot of cases, and having really that balance between being able to deal with those emotions in a strong masculine way, right? Because that's our innate ability, right? Like we don't expect men to become, totally weak in what they're doing in order to deal with the things that they do, because they have an innate ability to do these things. So how do you talk a lot about, I think, man masks, right? I'd like for you to kind of explain that more, but in that context, like how do we as men learn how to deal with some of these things that we need to deal with? And it may not be childhood trauma. It may be just a matter of, look, we just have we hate our jobs, or we're struggling in our marriage, or we're not happy with our relationship with our children, any of those things. Like, how do we balance those things?
Great question. I think it's for each individual. They have to deal with it different. They have to find their way. And I found that with, doing the workshops we do, mentoring men along the way, etc., and women as well, in different spaces. For men in particular, it's finding what works for you, for understanding you on a different level. And I think it's for me, the first step to change and moving forward is awareness. We have to first be aware that there's a challenge or there's an issue, and then be aware that we need to do something about it. And if we just live in this world of I'm just going to go through the motions, then that awareness becomes buried. And so for me, even with me and my wife, and I'm very blessed, we've been married for 15 years, and she was basically my carer for the first 10 years of our marriage. She was just trying to keep me going, and we've always had a very close relationship, always been very open. But what we've really found of the last 5 or 6 years or so is that if we feel disconnected, we'll walk up to each other and go, I feel disconnected from you at the moment. I don't feel like we're close. Can we do something together? And there's no blame. There's no blame there. You just feel disconnected. And one person may not feel that, the other person might. So we just stop what we're doing and go off and do what we need to do. So being vulnerable is really important. But also there's a strength in vulnerability. Brene Brown, says it's a superpower. And I 100% agree with that. It's about finding what that balance of being vulnerable but still being strong and independent in yourself, and finding your own voice and sticking by those beliefs and values that you have, and standing up and protecting your family and your friends, and speaking out when you need to speak out, because that's what the strength is. But the strength is also being vulnerable when you need to be vulnerable, and finding the balance between the two. That's when it comes to finding out who you are as a person. And that's, for me, I wouldn't speak up. I would, even as I was a police officer, when I had the uniform on, I was fine. Away from the job, I was very passive. Never got angry at all about anything. I kept it all buried, and so I was like in really passive shadow for almost all my adult life. It was very, very rare that anger came out, and if it did, it was quite intense, but I never lashed out at anybody. It was always at something, and and finding how to be in balance with all those things. It's a matter of finding who you are and letting go of the stuff that might be, like I said, controlling you within. So
Yeah. I like that disconnected thing that you were talking about. My wife and I actually did that on Sunday. She was like, look, I feel really disconnected from you. What's going on? And so then we had an opportunity to kind of talk. I had kind of a weird morning and was feeling kind of down and discouraged and some other things. And so we had an opportunity to kind of talk through that. And then it was all fine, right? Like if I had said, oh no, I'm sorry about that, whatever, here, and I didn't address it, that would have been that kind of would have created a longer lasting disconnect. And I think that in a lot of times in marriage, men take that, oh, I'm fine mentality, which then you're fine until you're not fine. And then you're no longer married. So, because that disconnection just stays there.
Exactly right. That disconnection, and I want to talk about the disconnection with my anger as well, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, when I was seeing a counsellor in my early 30s, she said, "Are you angry about what happened to you as a child?" I went, "No, why would I be?" She goes, "Because of what happened to you as a child." I'm going, nothing. And I was so disconnected from it, so disconnected from my emotions towards it in so many ways because I buried it for such a long time. And I'm an emotional guy. I'll get teary at the drop of a hat, and I'm quite all right with that. I was definitely more embarrassed about it when I was a young bloke, but in my 20s and 30s, it didn't sort of worry me too much. And so she said to me, this psychologist said to me, "I want you to go out to the bush, find a big tree. I want you to yell and scream at it as much as you can, and let out all your anger." And in my head, I'm going, "Are you kidding me? Come on!" And anyway, I agreed. I thought this is going to look stupid. And so I was in the northern suburbs of Perth, here in WA, Western Australia, not Washington, and I found this bit of bush. I was up there doing some work, found this bit of bush, and I said, "Okay, now's the time." So I walked out, found this big tree, this big jarrah gum tree, and asked permission. "Can I please let all my anger out at you?" And it didn't say no, so I took that as a yes. And so for the next 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 minutes, I yelled and screamed at this tree with all my might. But there was no emotion behind the yelling and screaming. Occasional car drove past, and so I had to hide behind the tree so they didn't actually see me, because they would have called the police and go, "There's some nutter out here yelling at a tree." And I felt a little bit embarrassed, a bit silly, but I did what she said, and there was no emotion attached to it. All I got was a sore throat from yelling and screaming. And she asked me how I went, and I said, "Well, there was nothing there." And she goes, "There is, and it'll come out one day." And fast forward to when I was 50, 18 years later or thereabouts, and I go to this workshop, and they press the right buttons, and guess what came out that day? Oh my God!
Yeah, all of it, right?
In one big monstrous explosion, and it wasn't just anger; it was pure white rage. It was pure white rage, and it would just explode at me for I don't know, 10, 15, 20, I don't even know how long it was for. It just kept coming out. And then the next day, some more came out. And when it came out the next day, I was doing some breath work, and this amazing, powerful breath work just let this other little bit out. And as soon as that last bit went, I was laying there, and all of a sudden I had this, and I don't know if you're old enough to remember Doris Day. And she had that little haze about her that made her look really soft. I had this image of my wife, but it was like this blue haze of her, and my eyes were shut. And I just felt this pure love for the first time in my life. And I just started sobbing uncontrollably because the rage out of me was all gone. And this pure love in my heart. And it was for our connection and our love, but it was also, more importantly, it was the love I felt for myself for the first time in my life. And I sobbed uncontrollably for, I don't know how long, 10 minutes or so. And then the next day, some more came out. And as soon as that last bit went, I had this, and I don't know if you're old enough to remember Doris Day. And she had that little haze about her that that made her look really soft. It was like this blue haze of her, and my eyes were shut. And I just felt this pure love for the first time in my life. And I sobbed uncontrollably for, I don't know how long, 10 minutes or so. And I was in a room of 25 blokes doing the same sort of stuff. And some blokes were yelling. I had a bloke next to me screaming, another bloke next to me laughing, and I was crying uncontrollably. and one of the mentors, one of the crew came up to me and he whispered in my ear, he goes, "What's going on?" I said, I'm just so happy. And he went, you're in a good place. I'll let you go.
Yeah.
And I just continued to cry, just in pure joy and happiness. And I just remember that moment. And again, goosebumps. I remember that moment so clearly. That's when the connection came back in. The connection to who I was, my emotions. And that weekend, just changed my life dramatically.
And has that been like a long-term process? I mean, what you're describing is almost like lancing a boil. Forgive the analogy, but it's almost like this not instantaneous, but kind of all at once release of that underlying pressure. What does that look like after that? Is it a renewing of those emotions on a regular basis, or?
I was euphoric for about 6 or 8 weeks. I was floating on air. And the only time my anger would come out was a little bit of road rage. If I'm doing, and I'll talk kilometers per hour here, if we're doing 85 in a 90 zone and someone's doing, 80 or 85 and I want to do 90, it's like, "Oh, what are you doing? Come on, get out of the way." And no one sees that except for my wife, and she hated that. And then I remember we're driving to work one day together, and Kim goes, "Oh, I wish this guy'd hurry up." It's like, "It's okay, honey. He's just on his own journey. He's just, it was just like, who are you? And what are you doing driving the car?" And so I had this beautiful peace and calm about me. But about 8 weeks later, all of a sudden, things started to fall apart again. Because what had happened is, I mentioned before, the abuse or the trauma, I'd removed that from my story, from who I was, but it left a big hole, and I didn't know who I was. And so then over the next 18 months, I had to find out, and I'll learn for the rest of my life who I am. But that first 18 months, I had to reconfigure or try and understand who I was as a person. And so the next 6 months or 12 months, 18 months, 6 months especially, was a real roller coaster for me. But I poured myself into other workshops, listening to self-help books, and I was just taking little bits and pieces. And I was also getting mentored along the way as well. I was doing my life coaching course. So every week I was getting mentored by some amazing people who are still now some very, very good friends of mine. And they just allowed me to put the pieces back together. They allowed me to see things from a different perspective. And when I understood that, I remember I was out the front here one day and I was doing some whippersnippering, and I had the wrong size cord in the whippersnipper. And I exploded when it kept breaking. And I was dropping every swear word I won't go into what they are, but you know what I mean? Every swear word in the language. My wife comes out and goes, "What are you so angry for?" And it's like, "This damn whippersnipper isn't working." and she goes, "It's just a whippersnipper." And I went, "Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, it is." And I had to take a step back. And then that week I got talking to I was being mentored by a friend of mine, and she said, "So what was the problem?" And I went, da 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 da. And she goes, "But what was underneath that?" It's like, and she went, "So you couldn't control the situation? Is that what you're saying?" I went, and what have you done all your life? And the penny dropped. Controlled my emotions, controlled what people saw, controlled how people viewed me, controlled everything I did. So it was just control. And all of a sudden, because this story had been taken on me, I'd lost control. And it's like, so I had to let go of control and go, you know what? Just let it happen. And that was, that moment where it's like, okay, accept things how they come, learn more about this control thing, learn more about yourself. And so it was a roller coaster, but bit by bit, the pieces started to fall into place. And just by doing the work, and that's what I said at the start, you have to do the work. By doing the work and doing gratitude work and journaling, journaling is one of the most powerful tools I think we have in our toolbox just for our own self. Breath work. I started doing ice baths, all those sort of things. They just added to the overall healing process for me. The growth and the learning, the adapting. So that's how I got to where I was. But it was lancing a boil. lancing a boil and then allowing it to heal over time. So
right, and trying not to pick at it, right? I guess that's a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think the machine that you described, by the way, we would call a weed eater, just for my U.S. audience. Yeah,
Yes.
my U.S. audience here. So if you put the wrong line in, it constantly breaks and all that. But now, what is that? So practically, what does that process look like as you're doing self-help books and getting mentoring, and like how are you filling in? So you've got this huge hole, because I'm trying to give people kind of a practical sense. Like if you find this hole, obviously you need to get to that point where you're identifying those issues and learning how to relinquish control and be vulnerable and find that. But how did that process work in terms of filling in that gap without just, because I started thinking, what a lot of men I think do is kind of put on a new mask or put on this new, like, okay, this is who I am now and this is who I'm going to be, but it may not be the true you. So you may go through multiple stages of that before you find yourself. And I'm curious how your process of filling in that hole and that gap actually worked, and what advice you give to your own coaching clients.
Oh, great question. Wow, that's a great question. The process, for me, it was just small steps. It was just being persistent and consistent every day, and I listen to self-help books. I don't read them. There's a couple that I have gone back and bought and read because I loved them so much. The one that changed, there was two that changed my life. When I was in the police force, I read The Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman. I went back the next week and resigned. And then the other one was, which started me on this next journey of my life and listening to self-help books, was The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. And so I've got all these, 80, 100 plus books on my phone that I listen to, and some of them were great, and I listened all the way through. Some were just halfway through, I just had to cut them off. They just weren't for me. And just by reinforcing the positive stuff, I think for me on a regular basis, because that little voice in your head can really take control. The non-believer, I call him Joe. Joe's on my shoulder. Joe can get on my shoulder and start talking BS and bringing me down. And so I had to learn some skills on how to deal with stopping the voice, reinforcing the positive, always being proactive with the work I did. Kim and I haven't listened to the news for 10, 15 years. We don't listen to any news at all. Occasionally on the radio on the way to work, but that's it, because every time you turn on the news channel, it's nothing but doom and gloom. When we read a newspaper, it's the same. And so we try and, we love comedies, so watch a comedy series. If you haven't watched Ted Lasso yet, watch Ted Lasso. Have you seen it?
Yeah, Ted Lasso is great. We watched all of that. It's one of the best. Like, again, I'm not a big crier, but you get me in front of a Ted Lasso or something like that, and I definitely cried a ton during those episodes.
And it's just a great lesson about how, if you fill your life with positivity and a positive outlook, even though you've got challenges, it'll help you grow and learn, but also the impact of those around you, your family, your friends, your community, and for that particular show, obviously the footy club and the community around that. But for me, it was just always just using my tools every day, my gratitude, my breath work, my journaling, as often as I can. And the more I got used to that, the more I journaled, the more I processed my emotions through that day. And that was probably my biggest one. And I made that a habit. So if I had a really negative event that day, or a negative emotion or a negative response, I would go back and ask myself, okay, what did I feel? Why did I feel it? What was underneath it? And by asking, and then what was underneath that? What was underneath that? What was underneath that? And by doing that time and time again, I would understand why I reacted that way, why I responded that way, why I thought or felt that way. And it always came back to this same pattern of the self-belief, the not believing yourself. You're a piece of, turd sort of thing. And but why do I feel like that? Oh, it's because of ABC. It's because of 1, 2, 3, whatever it was. And once I understood where it came from underneath it all, rather than just skirting over the surface, that's when it really started to hit home for me. That was one of the most powerful things. And as I got better at it, I could actually process it almost in the moment, or just, take a moment to step back thereafter. And instead of journaling about it, I could actually just process it in my head. Okay, I did it that way. Oh, okay, I did it that way. And if there's a real challenge, I'll go back to the journal again and write it out, because it's not just an emotional release, it's a physical release as well. By writing, it's a physical release. So I've got to the point now I can pick up the pen when I need to, but I can also process it when I need to as well, just because I've been practicing it for so many years now.
So you're using your journal almost like as an emotion processing center.
It is 100%. That's what it is.
And be able to walk through that and kind of refer back. And I think for men, that's probably a journey that's really difficult for a lot of men. Just because it's like, hey, get in touch with your feelings. Well, I would if I had any feelings, right? Which they do. But the joke is that, like, I don't even know how to identify a lot of the feelings that I have. I have 2 emotions, anger and annoyance. Yeah. So those are, that tends to be the way that, but how do you coach men on how to kind of, and I don't even want to say get in touch with your emotions, even though that's kind of what we're talking about, but really to kind of begin to identify some of the ways that your emotions affect your life.
How do I coach them? It's for me, it's about perspective. It goes back to perspective and awareness. Why do you feel this way? Where does it come from? Why are you angry? Why are you frustrated? Why are you what do you feel this way? What do you behave this way for? And a lot of times it's a defense mechanism. It's a survival mechanism. And almost not all the time, but on a major part of the occasions, it goes back to childhood. We learn our survival mechanisms as a child. If we grow up in a violent environment, or you feel abandoned because mum left or dad left, or there was a divorce, or like you said, there's alcoholism or drug use. You have to, and I remember speaking to some men, and they'll go to their father, and their father, they want to play with them, they want to get a cuddle or get a hug and just feel like they're, that connection with dad. And they'll be reading the paper, go, leave me alone, go away, be seen and not heard, sort of thing. And so every time that happened to them, they felt this pain, this rejection. Even though the dad may not be wanting to do that or do that deliberately, that's what the child feels. And so if that happens often enough, the child will go, well, I won't do that anymore, and I don't want to get hurt anymore, so I won't go up and approach him anymore, because I don't want to feel rejected and the pain. And so all of a sudden they push down that and those emotions. And so guess what happens every time they feel pain or emotion or rejection or something in the future? Okay, I won't do that again. I'll step away from that. And so all of a sudden there's this pattern going on of how they react and behave to certain situations, because it's been ingrained in them since a young child. And that's just one way, one example. But these survival mechanisms become ingrained in us, and we don't even know they're there. And so one of the things I try and do with the men that I mentor is try and understand why they act or behave the way they do, and then understand the feelings behind it then. And once they do that, and the penny drops, they can then see a pattern throughout their life about what they've done. And it's honestly, and I don't know if this is going to be seen or just heard, but their physical facial reaction is like, oh, their eyes open up, their jaw drops and goes, oh, I get it. Oh my God, I've done that all my life. And when they see that, then they can actually start to find their emotions in their own time. They can start to put the pieces together again. And I think that's probably, for me, that's my, you have to get to the bottom of it. That's the way I find it. You have to get to the bottom of the problem and understanding why you act and feel the way you do. And it's because it's been ingrained in us. Why we respond the way we do, why we react in a certain situation. It's our defense mechanism. It's our survival mechanism, because otherwise we'll be in pain all the time. And as a child, we don't understand it until, we get some support when we get older, because we're not taught any of this stuff as a kid. We have to find our own way in this space. We don't get taught any of this stuff, which is really sad, and for me, the education system, I don't know what it's like in America, but in Australia, they're looking, even as young as 5, they're going, they have to get better marks. It's like, no, they should you should be creating more and having fun and learning by using their hands and playing and, finding joy and learning what it is, building resilience. Because, this whole thing about everyone gets a prize, that doesn't work in the real world. And this is just my opinion. I know everyone has to be included and feel needed, but you don't get rewarded unless you do the work. And some people are great in some things, and sport's just one thing, but other people are great at working with their hands. Some people are great at talking to people. Oprah is the best person in the world for that. She was brilliant at it for 40 years. You've got to find your niche at what you're good at. And by just working at school on books and paperwork is not how you find what you're good at or can be creative at, etc. So
in the U.S. in particular, especially post-COVID, it was like we homeschooled our kids from about 5th and 6th grade throughout, and they graduated from high school at 17 and finished all that stuff. And that's been a more growing trend, a more popular trend now since COVID, because everybody was at home anyway, and they figured out that this Zoom learning thing was destroying their kids, and so it's been more of a movement, which I actually think is great, not because there's huge deficits in the public education system. It's just the nature of what it is, but it's actually really helping kids learn how to be humans, learn how to be adults, and learn how to be functional members of society, which we don't 100%. Teach them that stuff in public school. It just as a general rule, right? So
they've got a box they have to work into, and I get that, but at the same time, we have to maybe a little bit more creative in that space for our kids, for the next generation.
Yeah, 100%. It will be. It's interesting and scary, kind of this next generation that comes up. Because you and I are similar in age. I'm about to be 51. You're probably a few years older than me, but based on what you're saying, but like we didn't grow up in the everybody gets a trophy kind of thing, So we almost had it on the other side of the continuum where, tough love, rub some dirt in it, don't cry, those kind of things. But now we're on this other side, which is get rewarded for literally breathing. And so it's like at some point, hopefully we'll get kind of towards the middle. That would be kind of a great place to be.
100% agree. We have to get in that middle of that. Everyone gets, a participation award, but you also go, but you guys were the best. 1, 2, 3, you won. You have to have that, I think. But yeah, that's something for people much smarter than me to work through with much more intelligent power.
Yeah, me as well. So if I just want to, I want to be respectful of your time. I say that a lot on these podcasts, but if we're just giving kind of the guy that's listening to this is like, yeah, I can kind of recognize some of these things are going on, or I may have some patterns, but I don't really know where to start. What kind of advice would you give practically, to reach out to a coach like yourself or other coach that might be, more well suited for them or whatever, obviously, but kind of give me just a few little pointers that you would tell just your basic intro client, like getting started along this journey.
For someone who's looking to get started?
Yeah, someone that's like, okay, I'm a guy that, I really can see some patterns in what I'm doing, or I've been facing a lot of depression, or I'm angry at my wife, or all of these things. So I know that there's something going on, but I don't really even know how to start figuring out what's going on.
I honestly just reach out to someone who resonates with you. Whether it's a life coach, whether it's a psychologist, a mental health professional, even a family friend or a mate, someone who is emotionally open to talk about that sort of stuff, who has got some sort of understanding and who's just prepared to listen and support you. You have to find someone, I think, that really resonates with you. I think that's the secret, because if you don't, it's going to be tough to be your authentic self, and to really, because you'll be unloading stuff that you probably may have never unloaded before, and that's being very vulnerable, and you need to feel safe in that space. So finding a safe space, a safe person, someone who you resonate with, and then just being courageous to do it, because it takes courage to take that step. It takes a lot of courage, because we put, like you said, we put on our masks and pretend everything's okay, but we need to take that mask off for that little period of time and go, okay, I'm just going to be raw. And sometimes you don't know what that looks like because we've never been there before. But taking off that mask and just stepping forward is really, really important.
Yeah, and be able to develop that connection with someone that you trust and who trusts you, because like you said early on, it's like you had this person, this guy that basically called you out on your crap, right? To say, look, I hear what you're saying and I know you're full of crap. So let's get past the BS into what's really going on. But you have to have that connection in order to be vulnerable for yourself, but also have them trust you to be able to not treat you that way, but to be able to call you out in a way that can help you along your journey.
Yeah. In a positive way. It's asking finding people who will ask the right questions. It's not about, being abusive, or it's all about questioning. It's, and just asking the right questions at the right moment to get you to see things from a different perspective, because it's your story. It's not the person who's in front of you. It's not their story. It's your story, and they're trying to help you understand your story and your journey and your emotions behind it and where they come from. It's calling it out in a really positive way that will empower you. That's the most important thing. They're trying to empower you to find your path.
Yeah. And for everybody, that's different, guys, especially. It's, you may need someone that's a little bit more like you personally. A little more tough love works great for you, but it may not. Yeah. It may make you feel like crap and like completely retreat. So you got to, build those relationships and try to find someone that can lead you down that path for sure. If people want to reach out to you, if people want to see more of what you do, I know you got some TED Talks online that I saw and a lot of great content. So how do they reach out to you and find you?
We've got a website, themomentumrevolution.com. And I'm on Facebook, Dr. Brett Dellar. I'm sure you'll put a link up there. That's probably the best two places to find me, on socials, Instagram and Facebook. I am on Twitter, but for some reason I've been locked out of that for the last week or so, but I'm sure I'll get back on there at some stage.
Does it keep asking you for your password? It keeps I noticed on my pass, it did the same thing to me. So I think maybe Elon is just tired of dealing with people, so he's just kicking everybody off all at one time.
Yeah, that's what it is, and I'm just too confused. I need my IT specialist, aka my wife, to help me work through that and try and get back on again. But yeah, so Instagram and Facebook and obviously the website Momentum Revolution.
Okay, perfect. We'll get that out. Dr. Brett, appreciate you taking the time and spending some time with us. And I'll put that information on there. So if you guys want to reach out and kind of learn more about what he's got going on. So I appreciate your time, man.
Thanks, Kevin. Much appreciated. Love speaking to you. Really appreciate the conversation.
Me too.
If you're looking to really maximize your life and become the man you were made to be, head over to maxedoutman.com and get your journey started today.